Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this question and answer session about the Test to Stay pilot program in the Long Hill schools. We sent out a survey last week regarding the Test to Stay program, and the purpose of this program is for students who are not vaccinated or not fully vaccinated to participate in a program where if they take a test and it is negative, they can remain in school as long as they are symptom-free and continue to participate in the testing program. It's only designed for students who are identified as close contacts in school. So it's not for close contacts outside of school that might come from another household exposure or something in the community, simply because those would just be too hard for us to track. So when we looked at the Test to Stay program, we had a couple of options that we could implement. And the focus of implementing this program is to keep healthy students who've been exposed to COVID and are symptom-free in school as opposed to learning remotely. It's our next step in getting everybody back in all the time, trying to move away from the quarantines for close contacts, where the data has shown that in many contacts, we are excluding students who were close contacts and they are symptom-free and healthy at home. And of course, we prefer to have them in the schools. We have a federally funded program that is administered by Longview Testing Services. And right now, Longview is testing twice a week for faculty and staff in the building. And that's for vaccinated staff members and who opt in, and also for our unvaccinated staff members. We have been impressed with Longview so far. They've been coming here for a number of weeks. Most recently, when we moved into very high activity level on that COVID rating, we had to increase the testing to twice a week. So we do it on Tuesday mornings and on Friday mornings. When we test on Friday, we have the results by Sunday morning. And when we test on Tuesday, we've been getting the results by Thursday, which is great timeline considering that some of the tests are so backed up. The process of the Test to Stay program is geared at keeping healthy faculty, staff, and students who've been exposed to COVID and are asymptomatic in our schools. So in that case, an extended testing period of waiting even 2 days sort of defeats the purpose of the process. So Longview will be offering us rapid tests so that individuals would be able to test hopefully in the morning and then be able to come into school if they have that negative test and they're symptom-free. In order for Longview to do this program for us, they need to be able to staff it. And I don't need to tell you that staffing is tight and short in many places. So Longview is in the process of hiring more clinicians for us. The good news is that they gave us a threshold of 35 people who would have to participate in order for us to run the program here in Long Hill. The survey is open until Friday. And as of today, we have 38 students who have opted in. So we can use Longview. We've met their threshold for the number of participants. And that helps us not have to go down another road, because if we couldn't meet the number that they wanted us to have, we would have to develop an in-district program and pay for it out of our own budget money. So I'm happy to say that we won't be having to pay for it out of the school district budget, that it will be administered by Longview, and that we have 38 students who are interested. It's important to point out that this program is designed for K-12 schools. So pre-K students are not eligible to participate in the Test to Stay program. So you might have noticed in the survey that pre-K was not an option to choose. Of the 38 students, just for your own information, 4 are kindergarten, 8 first grade, 2 second grade, 3 8 third graders, 2 fourth graders, 6 fifth graders, 2 sixth graders, 6 7th graders, and 0 8th graders. So it is spread among grades K-7. Right now, we don't have anybody in the 8th grade participating, and our pre-K students are not eligible for this program. I know I delineated the pieces of the program in the survey. I hope everybody was able to read it. The real focus of the presentation is to answer questions that you have. So rather than going through things that we've already described about the program via email and survey, I'll just put it to you for questions. You can either call out your question in the Zoom. We're a small group. I'm sure we won't talk over one another, or if you're more comfortable, you can direct message me your question in the chat and I can put the question to the group without using your name if you prefer that. Tiffany.
Hi, I just had a quick question about, I guess, actual exposures. I know a lot of measures have been put into place since the beginning of the year, especially around lunchtime and dividing groups. I'm speaking mostly about Millington because that's what I know right now. But I know there are 2 groups for lunches. They're spaced apart. In the classrooms, they have their masks on. I'm trying to think of what would be considered, I guess, a true exposure at school to even get to the quarantine status, because I know in the past, if they were sort of, closer at lunch, that might have been where the exposure took place. And given the quarantine status, are there examples now where there are still, I guess, true exposures at school where there would even be required to do a quarantine or a test to stay?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we're definitely getting better, revising protocols as we go along. The majority of the exposures are still occurring in a couple of scenarios. One is, as you identified, lunch. And as much as we've tried to space them out, that still presents its own obstacles. The second is when we have students who maybe are not wearing their masks appropriately. By and large, the students are wonderful, but at some point they just, you're in a class, you're teaching 25 students and somebody decides that they're going to take their mask off and leave it on their desk, or they go to the bathroom and take their mask off and they forget and come out without it. It's not a perfect system. And once that protocol on wearing masks breaks down, that could result in a closer contact. So, the other thing is that if it's less than 3 feet, so some of the areas that we saw with the spikes is everybody wants school to be as close to normal as possible. What does that mean, for example, in elementary school classrooms? It means circle time. It means sitting together and reading a story. It means working on in close proximity, maybe sharing creative play. Our creative curriculum in pre-K and kindergarten requires like taking turns. And that's when we breached the 3 feet. So when we started to see contact tracing from those situations and we had to quarantine, we again sort of moved away from that. So at the beginning of the year, we brought back all of the rugs in our lower level classes. We had circle time again. We purchased a number of vacuum cleaners with high grade HEPA filters, and we had all these cleaning protocols in place. But when we looked at the data, that was the area where we were having to do a lot of contact tracing. So we sort of dialed that back until we get this at bay. But those would be examples. And I think it's an important thing to consider as a parent. If you maybe have an older child and you know that they, think about, have they been identified as a close contact yet? What is their schedule like? We also changed, gym is indoors sometimes now because of the cold temperatures. So that might be another example. Sharing supplies sometimes in art, as much as we try to discourage that, but those less structured activities are where we're seeing the contact tracing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, in my mind, school is actually the safest place to be. It's most of the spread, I feel like, is just outside of school. So it almost seems like I mean, obviously I'm praying that we go back at some point to, just a general common sense. If your kid is symptomatic, they stay home. If they're not fever free, they stay home for 24 hours, things like that. I know we're still a ways away from that, but it does seem like if there is very limited contacts in school and they are not symptomatic, that I was trying to think of ways that they even could spread it at school, just because so many things have, been put into place. My other question was just on the number of days for the testing. It looks like for the Test to Stay program, there are 4 tests that would be conducted as part of that program for the week. Is that right? Days 1, 3, 5, and 7?
Yeah, every other day. Okay. With the quarantine now being 5 days as opposed to 7. So when they first published the guidelines for us and recommended testing on day 7, that's when the quarantine was 7 days.
Okay.
So it would likely just be the 3 days, days 1, 3, and 5.
Okay. And with that day 1, because I keep trying to think of like the time frames that they've said around exposure, waiting 3 to 5 days. In my mind, it would almost be 1 test in order to stay in school, so that you can allow that window for symptoms to show up or to test positive if you are truly positive. Because day 1 seems like it would almost be too soon. So I didn't know, it seemed like almost a waste of a test if it was going to be too soon and it's day 1 to do that. I was just trying to eliminate, the testing and obviously the administrative piece, plus any of the young kids, especially who might be traumatized by all the testing. Okay, so the number 7 obviously gets removed, but it's at least 3 at this point.
Right.
Okay.
And then just 2 quick questions in the chat, and then we'll go to Kristen, who has her hand raised. So for clarification, I did not mention this, but a vaccinated student is the same as a student who has tested positive for COVID. If you test positive for COVID, you don't have to quarantine for 90 days. Because the antibodies and the direction that we have from the CDC says that a positive COVID case does result in 90 days of being exempt from quarantine. I did have some questions from people who asked, what if if we're in the middle of this 90-day, free quarantine time, like we get a pass because we had already gone through COVID, should we still opt in? And yes, you should, because if the program extends beyond that time, then you might want to avail yourself of the testing when you're back in from the quarantine exemption. So there was a question about indoor and gym. We actually went back to that. So we retooled the gym a little bit, the way that we're administering it. Some students do choose to wear masks in gym, and we've encouraged that when they are closer to lessen the quarantines. And just to give you a perspective, because I know no one wants to have their child quarantined. Last year, under the old guidelines, and when the pandemic began in March of 20, we were looking at an average between 14 and 17 close contacts. That's kind of where the net was. Now, per case, it's 3 or less students. So that shows us that those efforts are working. But yes, generally students are wearing masks in gym if they're closer together, and then it's optional when they're doing activities where they're really exerting themselves physically. So I have no idea how long this program will last. I guess until everything goes to the point where we're just simply monitoring COVID, as we have for so many years in this school monitored the flu. So during the flu season for decades, and I've been doing them for as long as I can remember doing this, we had what was called the Tuesday flu call. And you would just call the Department of Health every Tuesday, report all the flu-like symptoms for your district, report the numbers by student grade level with no other information. And the Department of Health would keep an eye on it and monitor it and say, oh, okay, now you're getting to an area where you have to enact these measures, whether it be additional cleaning or quarantining a particular group of students. That's where I imagine we're going to try and go, but I have no timeline on when we're going to get there. Kristen, thank you so much for your patience. What is your question?
Hopefully you can hear me.
Yes,
can you hear
no
me?
problem. We can hear you.
Yeah, thanks for setting up this Zoom call, because I think it's helpful to talk through some of the points. So I just wanted to ask you to reconfirm what you said before, that if you have recovered from COVID, then that is equivalent to being vaccinated, and you can step out of you can opt into the program, but just be not, not registered for now. Is that correct? Did you say that?
Yeah, absolutely. So in two ways. So first, vaccinated students and it's important that you let the district know if you've tested positive for COVID, so that we know the date and we can mark you on that 90-day exemption from quarantining.
Mm-hmm.
And that way you wouldn't even be contacted to tell to quarantine, because there's nothing really to say. Everybody knows that whether you're, in your car and going food shopping or out and about, you could be exposed. So we wouldn't even notify you, because it wouldn't have an implication for school. With the registering piece, just understand that the next step of the program is registering, just providing some information and signing that you consent to the testing. You only test if you've been identified as a close contact. And once you fill out the consent form, it does take 2 days to process. So I would recommend that you fill out the consent and do that, even if you know that you've got, 40 days before you would even have to quarantine if you were identified. And I appreciate the question in the chat about the masks and gym. You have an experience as a parent in the school system that's valuable to us. And if you see an improvement, or if you have a question where you think we might be able to minimize close contacts even further, we would like to hear those.
Mm-hmm. I just had one more question. What about siblings? So as you know, if they are identified as a close contact, you automatically consider the sibling that's in the home a close contact too, and then has to be tested as well?
So if you can create, and all of us are not this fortunate, but if you can create a situation in your home where you can, wear masks in your home, keep your children, keep your children separate, and, have different meal times, or, if there's enough measures that you can take to isolate for those 5 days in your home, then we can work with you to not automatically quarantine in those situations.
Okay. Okay, good. And do they contact the parent right before the test?
So in this case, the parents would be there for the test, because you're bringing your child in, and you would be there to supervise for the test.
Oh, okay. And where is it done then? In the nurse's office?
No, in the board office. So down here at the rear of Gillette School. This is what they're doing now with faculty and staff. So I assume it would be the same. One location, the rear entrance by where the drop-off line is in Gillette. There's a separate entrance. You just come in and test, and you can wait and get cleared to come to school.
Okay. And do you know the type of device they're using for it? Is it like the one that we could buy over the counter, like the same brand, or is it something else like they use in a doctor's office?
So it is it's a laboratory grade test, not like the drugstore brand. Up to this point, I can only tell, I have made the request, especially since we're dealing with younger students, if we could have the saliva test. But right now, Longview is only processing the nasal swab tests.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Jessica, you have a question?
Hi. I actually have two questions. The first one is, my daughter is actually very good at swabbing her own nose and is more comfortable with that than having someone else do it. I don't know if you would know the answer to this, but would the children be able to swab their own nose supervised if they did so, properly?
Yes.
They would be able to?
Yes.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay. And then the second thing is, what would lunch look like for these students? Knowing that they're supposed to remain 6 feet apart from other kids. So I know at least at Gillette for now, they are seated in their classroom for lunch. So it might not be as obvious if a teacher kind of just pulled their desk a little bit further away. But in situations where they're in the gym for lunch, if they're sitting at a desk on the other side of the gym by themselves, like what are we doing about that to make the students not feel so isolated and kind of have the scarlet COVID on their chest?
Right. So, I mean, it feels like who of us has not had that yet, right? Because it's just been so prevalent that we have all had to deal with it ourselves or in our homes. We actually started this today at Central and Millington because we have students returning on the 5-day quarantine with some additional areas. And there's more than one student who's coming back at the same time. So typically what we've done is, and it works so far today at lunch, I just checked the first lunch service and the plans for them. Those students may sit together. They may be placed in a seat, for example, that's closer to, if they have assigned seats in Millington, that's close to one of the exit doors. So then they're less around people, but they're still at a lunch table. So they're maintaining the distance, but they're sitting at a table. And we just really have been reminding the students as best we can of what the protocols are, but we know it's not going to be perfect, but we do have a guiding principle not to isolate the students or stigmatize them, but also to keep everybody healthy. It's interesting that because of the cold weather, when they go out for recess, there's a number of students who have had no exposure to COVID, but they like wearing their masks outside for recess just because it's warmer. So we have these students who have nothing to do with close contact, and they're not taking their masks off when they're outside because they're like, if I go like this, it keeps me really warm when I'm outside. So recess has been, pretty straightforward and typical. Tony, you have a question?
Yeah, hi, thank you so much. And I agree. Thanks for setting up the Q&A. This was great. I was curious, so you said that the parents would have to take this kids to the building to test. So what's the time frame for that in the morning?
So we're trying to get it set up before school starts.
Okay.
And if we have difficulty and a parent would be unable to be there while they're testing, see, because the way I'm kind of envisioning it is if it's a test to stay program, we are assuming that if you're asymptomatic and you come in, your test is negative, but it could be positive. So we're going to need some clearance from the parent to make sure that we have someone there to take the child home if their test shows up 15 minutes later as positive, because then they wouldn't be able to stay, of course.
Okay, gotcha. Do you think if it is before school, do you think like 20 minutes before school? Like it's not going to be something like 7 a.m. It's probably going to be.
So right now it's for the, and again, preferred time slot. So we put in all these things. Here's our preferred time slot, 8 a.m. Here's our preferred testing method. But when you're having the program paid for someone else, then you're at the mercy of their testing schedule and their personnel. It might look differently. They might say to us, we weren't able to hire somebody at that time. Gotcha. And if they offer us a slot at noon, then the child would have to be remote and in the morning come in and test and then stay. And we're going to have to be flexible with what we're able to get from them, but we put in our stipulations for what we would like.
So in terms of being flexible, does that go for us as well? Like if we opt into the program, do we have the ability to be like, we're just going to quarantine this time? Like, let's
Yes. Okay. Always. You don't lose any access to remote instruction if you look at this and you say, you know what, I mean, also think about the 5 days. If it's, 2 of them are a weekend and, you might have a plan or a holiday, like I'm even thinking about that week in February that we have where we're off Thursday, Friday, Monday. Well, why would anybody test in during that time if maybe all they're missing is 1 day and it might not be working within a family to get that testing set.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. One last question. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
In terms of like the isolation at school, they do get to participate in gym. They just have to wear their mask? or are they withheld from gym?
So they were masking at all times, but
Okay, but they can play.
but no curriculum changes. So they would
Okay.
participate in gym, but they would have to mask.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much.
A 90-day period is if you have, what we were talking about with 90 days for the question in the chat is if someone tests positive, they're exempt from quarantining for 90 days. And that is for vaccinated, unvaccinated, anybody who tests positive for COVID is exempt from quarantining for 90 days under the current guidelines. Jennifer, you had a question?
Yes, hi. Thanks for having this meeting and clarifying. Just two questions. One to clarify in the gym. So I know at Central, some of the room, like art is small and gym, they tell them they can take it off. If they choose to space themselves out and wear their mask for the full gym, even when there's high activity, does that prevent being classified as a close contact? Like, because especially the older ones, they're old enough to make those decisions. Like, will they, will that prevent the close contact?
So in the question of whenever we close contact a gym, there is a conversation with the teacher and what the teacher observes.
Okay.
And the teacher's lesson plan was for the day. The other ones are very straightforward. And there's been
right.
where it's straightforward and we make a mistake. So we use a busing list and then we call someone to say they're a close contact and they say it happened on the bus. And then the family tells us, well, they didn't ride the bus today, So that, but in most cases, we pull up the seating chart in Genesis and we're looking at what is 3 feet, which is typically regulated to 1 student maybe or 2. But in gym, it's always an interview and a conversation with the teacher about what happened that day. So if that teacher would know that I had all the students in masks today because we were doing this activity and it was difficult to maintain separation.
Okay. And then just one other question on the timing and the testing, understanding staffing is an issue everywhere. If we have a home test and on the schedule do a home test and can show like a picture or proof, does that count if they can't supply, the times we need to get our children to school? Is that sufficient if we did one at home?
So what I'm working on is this, because they have not approved home tests. So that's the simple answer. But we have some antigen tests here. And that we had given and we could donated to the school that are of the grade that is acceptable. And then we can also purchase them. So when I see the numbers and when it's working out, I think the numbers are going to be small. I would just say, we'll try and work with you to offer an alternate time and just come in and test with the supplies that we have here that we can validate. Because it's really just about, not that, I know this sounds crazy, but it's not without even arguing, is this test better, is that test better? It just has to be supervised.
Right, understood.
And they wouldn't let us take a picture of somebody's test.
Okay, thank you.
So some of the folks who asked questions still have their hand raised. So if you have a question as a follow-up, please ask that now. Or if anybody would like to put a question in the chat, please do so. Jennifer?
Sorry, I must have hit it again.
Oh, no, that's okay.
I just asked my question. Sorry about that.
All right, I just wasn't sure if you had a follow-up, not a problem.
No, I don't. Thank you.
So the next step will be us getting the best schedule. I do appreciate the feedback from this Q&A because it seems like people may be amenable to try and just doing a test that's supervised by our personnel if we can't get Longview in here at a time that would work for your family. Also, the idea that the individual, if they can do so, would be able to administer the test themselves. I think I conveyed that the main issue is that the test be supervised. And we have 38, so we meet the threshold and we don't have to design our own program, but we will supplement And again, we see this as an important step to keep everybody safe, but to reduce some of these close contacts and keep kids in-person instruction as much as possible. Alrighty, never hesitate to give me a phone call or reach out via email. If you're like me, you walk out of a meeting, you're like, oh, why didn't I ask that question? That's what I was actually thinking about. Please know that you can always send me an email or place a phone call, and I'll follow up with any answers to your questions. For next steps, please be on the lookout for information from Adele Valentine, who is the administrative assistant who's helping us with this program, and she will share with you all of the consent forms from Longview and the details on the testing schedule. And remember, you only have to do this if you've been identified as a close contact. So you could opt into this system and never have to use it. My youngest, who's in high school, I thought, my goodness, it's been a year and a half. And of course, I said it out loud. He's never been identified as a close contact. 4 times so far this year. You know, you kind of go through that. So you may opt in and may not have to use it. And that's what we're hoping for. Great question. Do we know when this will start? So the survey closes on Friday, and our anticipated start date is about 2 weeks from then. So we should be beginning it at the latest by the 2nd week in February. Oh, if you're having trouble with the survey, I just gauged by the fact that 38 people fully completed the survey that it was working. But what's the specific oh, now it's 39. What's the specific problem with the survey?
I'm just having trouble access it to load. Don't we need to, is that how we're like opting in by filling out the survey?
Oh, so that's step 1. Good question. And then step 2 is you'll receive an email from Adele and Longview to do the consent. So there's no consent at this point. We needed to get a certain number of people to be interested and gauge interest before Longview would agree to do the testing. They said 35 was the number that we needed, and we have 39. So they administer the program for us. So step 2 is you'll get the consent from Adele.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I thank you very much for your time, and I hope everybody has a great day. And if anything again comes up, never hesitate to reach out.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Take care.